Greetings and welcome to the Superb Diamond Range podcast. This is your host Superb, broadcasting from Edinburgh. This episode I will be discussing my favourite arcade video game of all time, Streetfighter 2. Firstly, I'll start by saying how I was introduced to the game. I remember it being the early 90s, and I remember a friend's birthday party. On a weekend, we went to like a swimming pool leisure centre, and after we finished swimming, we all went up to get a meal. And I remember seeing two big machines in the corner with quite a big crowd of people around it, and it was the game Streetfighter 2, the World Warrior at the time, and all my friends started putting their coins in to start playing, and I just remember watching, thinking, wow, this game's completely awesome. Just two guys in karate suits beating the crap out of each other. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So I just decided, I've got some spare coins, I'll put some in and try my luck. And I remember picking Dalsim as my first fighter, and I just got my butt kicked basically, which was a great introduction to the world of Street Fighter. I would say that my best fighters, for me personally, would be Akuma. I really liked that he was so powerful and strong, and the way that he was able to do a fireball and let a fireball out midair. I would say that for most people, the best fighters in general would be Ken and Ryu, although I would argue that Ken might be slightly better than Ryu. In my own opinion, but purely just because he had a dragon punch that kind of, came at more of an angle, as opposed to Ryu going straight up into the air. So you could kind of catch you, at any time. And, one of the biggest things about the game is the special moves. And that is what it was kind of known for. The dragon punch is obviously like best move in the game, I think, but the fireballs are like a close second. Some people will talk about the Psycho Crusher by Bison, which I believe is Vega in the American version. So I would say that the special moves are what made it such a great game, because once you learnt how to do them, and obviously timing them right, timing them as a counter, it was always a satisfying feeling. And obviously if you practiced at the game and you were pulling off the special moves, and you put on a good performance in beating somebody, whether it be a friend or even just versus the arcade, which was always really tough. There was obviously moves like the spinning bird kick by Chun-Li that is really famous. One of the things I noticed quite a bit about the arcade in particular was, whenever we had to do a move, say we had to hold back for 3 seconds, go forward to hit punch or kick to make a special move, the arcade characters never seemed to have any real charge time. It seemed that they could pull off a special move instantly, without even taking time to charge, which was really funny, because you just couldn't believe how quickly they would recover from a daze, or how they could pull out a special move so fast. Moving on, I would say the thing I wanted to talk about was the music. I think that is such an important thing in the game. Another reason why it's so great, each stage or each country you visit and each fight that you take on, you normally you hear their stage music, and I would say that my favourites are definitely Ken's stage. I would also say Guile is one of my favourite, and it's really interesting that both are in the USA. When I used to play on Guile's stage, I used to deliberately like to lose the first or the second round, just so that I could hear the music, and I would like to have a long drawn out fight to again listen to the music. So it was kind of really, really good fun to hear it. I would also like to say I do like Balrog's music, or in America that would be known as Bison. That is an amazing music as well. There's so many good musics. Even the Chun-Li's music's quite good, I think, now that I've listened to it recently. I wanted to mention, because you hear me quite a few times talking about the name being different in the US, and obviously there was a lot of name changes between Europe and the US. I did a bit of research on this via Wikipedia, and I'll just kind of go through it for anybody of our listeners that might not have been aware why the names were changed and what the reason behind it was. So I'm just going to read off Wikipedia basically. It says that the concept of likeness rights is quite different between the Japan and the US. Specifically, the US is much more strict. Therefore, the boxer of Mike Bison would clearly cause legal problems for Capcom in America. At around the same time, some Capcom USA execs expressed concerns that Vega would feel like too feminine of a name to Western audiences and would be appropriate for the game's final boss character, the Dictator. They felt that the name Vega would be more appropriate for the somewhat androgynous Spanish clawed character. Therefore, those three characters' names were rotated. Mike Bison, the boxer, became Balrog. Balrog, the clawed fighter, became Vega. And Vega, the Dictator, became M. Bison, which would be retconned to stand for Master Bison. In Japan, the character of Balrog is named M. Bison, with the letter being an initial for Mike, and is intended as a parody of the real-life boxer Mike Tyson. However, when the game was to be ported for worldwide audiences, under the suggestion that the character's name and likeness resemble Tyson to the point of infringement, the developers rotated the names of three of the boss characters for the English localization, as they felt the name Vega was better suited for the Spanish bullfighter. They gave him the character's previous name, Balrog, and changed the name of the game's final boss to M. Bison. In Streetfighter Alpha 3, Balrog tells some of his defeated opponents that he's going to bite their ear off, a reference to Tyson's infamous fight with Evander Holyfield. So there you go. So now you'll understand more about the name changes. Every now and again when I used to play arcade mode, whether it be in the real arcade or on a console, obviously in arcade mode, there were certain fighters that I used to find that if they were in form, they were unbeatable. And I'm sure lots of listeners will relate to what I'm saying, no matter how good they were or, at playing. But I used to find, like, on their day, like, fighters like Cammy to be really tricky to beat. And, she could just hit you with a combo and then just go for you and just take you out, basically. Balrog, obviously, also known as M. Bison, I believe. Getting confused now myself. Whenever he hit you with a combo and, he followed it up, again, he could just daze you and knock you out really easily. Sagat as well was, pretty devastating once he got his tiger uppercuts going. And, he'd obviously be pretty good at hitting you with the tigers. So I'd like to talk about the competitiveness of playing complete strangers in social clubs, or just friends in general. I used to go to, with my parents, to like an Irish social club, and, it was all good fun for the adults that were, there every Saturday having a few pints. But for the youngsters, all we had to look forward to was, a glass of Coke or just, being bored all night. That was, of course, until they introduced an arcade machine called Streetfighter 2 Champion Edition at that time to the social club. And all of a sudden, it was fun to go to social club every Saturday. And I remember just, just keep asking my parents for money to go and play it. And I used to get really, really badly beaten up by guys much older, teenagers much older than me, that would pretty much be on it all the time, and they would complete the game a few times, and I would always sort of put the coin in and here comes a new challenger, but it was more kind of hoping that I would beat them than actually believing in myself that I could beat them. I think it wasn't really until I got to the point where it started to be coming out onto the consoles that you actually had a chance to practice a bit more, and you could learn how to fight basically in the game. That I started to feel more confident. So yeah, I used to play a lot at friends' houses, and it was always very fun, and it was always competitive, and we used to always make a big deal, and we used to sometimes do best of 3, best of 5, best of 10, and quite a lot of the time I used to lose as well. And I remember I was practicing a lot once and thought I'd got to the point where I was really good, and there was a guy that lived across the street from where I lived, and I told him how good I thought I was, and he said to me, do you want to play me? And because I thought, oh yeah, this will be easy, and I'd been working so much on the special moves, on the dragon punches, the fireballs and uppercuts and different things like that, that when I went to fight him, I was just going all out on the dragon punches and fireballs, and in the meantime he kept jump kicking, side sweeping me, and he'd done this every fight. And when I lost the first round, I thought, what happened here? It didn't even last 10 seconds, the round. And I realized that I've got to start blocking a bit more, and trying to counter what was going on. But yeah, he took me out basically in 2 rounds, and I think I gave him another game, and I think it was the same result. And I sort of had to walk with my head down from then on in that area where I used to live. But yeah, it was always very good fun, and even when you lose, it's like you don't lose the love for the game. A bit like a boxer, I guess, that loses a few fights, they don't fall out of love with the sport. They just go back to training and try and become champion again someday. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the arcade again. I know a little bit about the history, but not quite as much, because there is a lot of mystery to it. But I know that obviously there was the game that came out, Streetfighter, which apparently didn't do too badly. The only problem they had was they had a system where I think you could punch pads, and the harder you punched the pad, the more powerful the blow was. And this wasn't very popular. Like, a lot of people didn't really get this, and by the time, there was a lot that happened in between Street Fighter 1 and Street Fighter 2, but by the time Street Fighter 2 came out, they'd already developed the idea of 6 buttons, and basically that you would have like a sort of 3 punch buttons and 3 kick buttons, and obviously the punch button would have like a jab, a medium punch, and a fierce punch, and the same for the like a sharp sweep and a kind of medium sweep, and then a full roundhouse sweep, depending on which character you're playing. And this was much better, and a lot of people preferred that, and I think they sold more units with that 6 button system, that type of playing. Me personally, I wasn't a fan of the stick and the 6 buttons. I actually preferred the control pad. I had felt I could pull off the moves a lot quicker with the control pad, D-pad, directional pad, than I could with the stick. So to me, that was one of the things that was going on with Street Fighter 1. And then what happened was, in Japan, it was really popular at the time, Double Dragon, and side-scrolling beat-em-ups were the thing. So they really wanted to do a Street Fighter 2, but they weren't quite ready. So what they talked about doing was another game which did eventually come out, which was called Final Fight. And Final Fight was basically, it was supposed to be Street Fighter, but they decided that they were going to change the name to Final Fight because, they had other plans, and, they decided that they were going to obviously do Street Fighter 2 at that point, which was going to be more like Street Fighter 1, but obviously a lot better. And they took quite a lot of the ideas from Final Fight, and in later series of Street Fighter, characters from Final Fight appeared, and also like the bonus stages, like smashing up the car. That was the first time was in the Final Fight game, as well as obviously in the Street Fighter series, there's been many variations of the the bonus rounds, whereby you'd have like the barrels where they'd break the barrels. There'd be one with the, if I remember rightly, it was cans on fire that would explode. And also there was, I think that one went away after one of the early versions. But, obviously in the more recent versions like Street Fighter 4, they have like whiskey barrels that fall down, and it's kind of like the same, but it's just been done a little bit different and maybe a little bit better. So that was quite cool, the whole bonus round, and it was always good to get a perfect in that. Speaking about perfect, I haven't even mentioned that. That is one of the major things in the game. Is like in Mortal Kombat, it's known as flawless victory, but in the Street Fighter world, it's called a perfect. So basically, it's like a whitewash of your opponent, and it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's really sweet. And you have to be really quick and fast, and just go in and do what you have to do. But it is really great to get a perfect in Street Fighter. I want to talk a little bit about the console versions of Street Fighter 2. The first, if I remember rightly, being on the Super Nintendo. It was great that it came out, and it was really, really good. And it also came out on the Mega Drive. And, I remember at the time believing that both versions were excellent. I think I slightly preferred the Mega Drive version. But anyway, as time went on, the PlayStation came out, which, was a lot more powerful than the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo. And that's another reason why what I'm going to talk about might make more sense. But when you sort of go back to the Super Nintendo version or the Mega Drive version, you'll realize they were never really arcade perfect. And that's because maybe they didn't have the power to kind of produce arcade perfect quality, because, Street Fighter was pretty revolutionary at the time in terms of the board and the arcade and so on. And one of the things that I noticed about it was that the game was it was a friend of mine basically told me about a game on PlayStation that was called Street Fighter Collection. And Street Fighter Collection, it used to be on a disc, obviously, which was very different to a cartridge. And when it used to play the music, the music used to stop after a while and then start again, like a CD, track 1, track 2, and there'd be a gap in between. And on the arcade perfect version, it loops the music, so it never stops, basically, just keeps going. And that was one giveaway that, the early versions weren't arcade perfect. The other thing was like the sound of the characters. They didn't quite have the same sound. It just sounded terrible, to be quite honest with you. I'm not sure. I used to think that the Super Nintendo version was the weaker one, but I'm starting to lean more towards the Mega Drive having worse sound, because they actually did try and change the game quite a bit. But yeah, only if you went back now and played them, you'd understand what I mean. But the biggest giveaway, which a friend of mine pointed out, and I never even thought about, was that, you know, whenever you're walking backwards in the Super Nintendo now, I might not be quite right on this, but I believe that they don't have the same stance that they do when they're in the arcade, and that although you will block if somebody's attacking you, when you normally walk backwards and walk forwards in the Super Nintendo or Mega Drive versions, you kind of look the same. You know, you look not much different, but there was a major difference between walking back in the arcade version versus, you know, obviously the Super Nintendo and Mega Drive. And, you know, that was another giveaway. But, you know, moving on to sort of more arcade perfect versions, I would have to say, in my honest opinion, that the Dreamcast version of, I believe the game is Super Street Fighter 2, the Grandmaster Challenge, is absolutely the best console version of Street Fighter. You know, it was just absolutely perfect. The only problem was, you know, it was very big in Japan, and it didn't really, you know, Dreamcast wasn't so big in the UK. I'm not too sure about US, but basically it didn't really make it over here. I mean, you could get it on an import, but it was in Japanese, and I mean, I owned the game at one point, and I thought it was brilliant, but it was just difficult to do certain things like unlock certain characters because, again, it was all in Japanese, and it did have, like, I think it was the first time, maybe not, but first time that there was like an online mode where you could play other people that had Dreamcast around the world, which again, it not being big in the UK wasn't really an option. And also the internet wasn't that what it is now back then, so it was like, you know, having a good connection and being able to, you know, do it, you know, play like you can now, you know, with online gaming's really taken off. So that was something that was definitely like an issue. As for like the best ever versions of Street Fighter, going back to what I just mentioned about the arcade perfect game on the Dreamcast, you know, my picks would definitely be Super Street Fighter 2 X, the Grandmaster Challenge. To me, it was just like, you know, many people will argue that Street Fighter 2 Turbo was like the peak. And, you know, in a way it kind of was, but for me, Super Street Fighter, you know, it just had better sound. It kind of had fought other challenges, which, you know, maybe some people will argue they weren't needed, but they were okay. They could fight. And Kami's quite tough, and Fei Long was pretty good. T-Hawk's again another fighter that when he's on form he's hard to beat. You know, I really liked it, and I mean, I just figured they kind of perfected everything, you know, in that game. And you know, I would say definitely, you know, in the early Street Fighter days, you know, you'd have to say that Turbo was the best. But yeah, looking back on it now as a complete series, I would say definitely Super Street Fighter 2X Grandmaster Challenge. But also I did quite like, and again this was on the Dreamcast, arcade perfect again, was Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. This was just an absolutely brilliant game. Again, I don't know if it was given the credit that it really deserved, but it, you know, I remember playing it, and at the beginning I was like, you know, I don't recognise too many of the characters, and that was one of the things that put a lot of people off Street Fighter 3, that they kept a few favourite characters, and some of them you could unlock, but mainly there was a lot of new faces, and, you know, a lot of people might not have taken to the new characters really. But in terms of gameplay, and, you know, I actually think it was an absolute brilliant game. And you know, since then I have gone on to play Street Fighter 4 on the PC, which, you know, I thought is brilliant as well. But definitely, I'm not sure if it probably is better than Street Fighter 3, but you know, that's, for me, my personal favourite would be Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Again, it had good music in it as well, that, you know, if you played it again, you'd sort of realise. I wanted to talk about funny stories from, you know, the arcade days, and, you know, a lot of it involved myself and friends and, you know, different things. But, we used to all do things like, we'd look for any opportunity to play the game, and it wasn't like easy to just say to my parents, hey, I want to go down to the arcade and put, a fiver or tenner into it or more. I felt a bit like I was gambling basically. And I'm pretty sure that's how my parents would feel, if I spent all my money on an arcade game. And, so I used to ask for money and stuff when I was at school and just, I need it for this or I need it for that. And, I used to do things like, I used to be sent to get some groceries, some essentials, bread, milk, eggs, whatever. And, I'd be sort of told, go and get me these and bring them back because, we're going to use it for lunch. And, I would sort of go into the store and I would try to find the cheapest bread, cheapest milk, all just to have some change, and I used to always go home and say, I didn't have any change and I'm pretty sure my mum and my dad used to look at me like, are you sure you don't have change, from that? And I'd be like, there's 5p or whatever, wherever I could just find in my pocket. But, I'd done this quite a lot, and I was doing it all the time, and also I'd disappear for a long time. So, a simple walk to the shop should take 10-15 minutes round trip, because it was really nearby. But, of course it used to take half an hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour. And there was one time when I met up with a friend to play, and, I must have been in there almost over an hour and a half. And then, one of my parents came by and just sort of was standing in the shop, watching us like, what are you doing? So yeah, it was quite funny. Just got completely busted playing Streetfighter really badly. But yeah, it was good fun. There was a shop near where I used to live. It was on the route to school, and it was like an old corner shop, and they had 3 or 4 arcade machines in the hallway, behind where all the sweets and Coke cans were, etc. And it used to accept the old 50p coins, so we used to have to trade new 50p coins for the old ones that the shopkeeper kept, because obviously every time he emptied the arcade machine, he would be able to recycle those old 50p's. And I remember a time when I went in with 3 friends to the arcade machine, and there was a really tough, strong-looking guy that was on one of the machines, and I remember he reached it was either round 2 or round 3 of the fight with what we would call Bison, what in America they would call Vega or Balrog. I can't remember, but anyway, the final fight. And basically what happened was 2 or 3 of the arcade machines were switched off, and my friend wanted to turn another one on, and he went to where the switches were, and he hit a random switch, and boom, the guy that was in the final fight, in the final round, after no one knows how much money he put in, or how if he lost the fight and had to sort of put more money in to continue, his screen went completely blank. And I just felt really bad, because I was like, what's going to happen here? Is my friend going to get beaten up in a real street fight? or what's going to happen? So in the end, we just, my friend offered the guy like the money that he was going to use to play. And, the guy still wasn't too happy, because he was about to complete the game and he got his money taken. But it was definitely a really, really good laugh. And, it's really funny that, we went in to play a game about street fighting, and we almost ended up in a street fight, which was really, really good. Well, not really good. But it worked out okay, I guess, in the end. And there was even talk about us being, like a gambler is so used to going to the betting shop. It felt like, even for me, we were really addicted because it was always that thrill of not knowing if we were going to win the fight, how far we would get. If we could even dream of completing it. Now, I myself have to confess to never completing the physical arcade machine. And there's also another story regarding that. I actually bought a Streetfighter arcade machine. I bought it. I found a place online that was selling them, and I believe it was Streetfighter 2 Turbo. And I bought it at a time when my parents were on holiday, and I paid something like 250 quid for it. And I got it delivered again while my parents were on holiday, and I wanted to actually have it, obviously, in my bedroom. But I realised that it was so heavy, the arcade, and when they dropped it off, it was just a simple drop off to the my front yard, as they would say in America. So I ended up, because I lived in a semi-detached house, and there was like an alleyway, and in the alleyway there was always it was kind of shared with the next door neighbour. So I did have an arcade machine in there, and I used to have to run a really long extension lead, from my sort of kitchen out to the alleyway, and I used to actually put coins in, and I had people come round. I had neighbours that would come round. I had friends that would come round to play, and it was brilliant to actually be able to say that I owned a Street Fighter arcade, and it was brilliant. And it was just having that sound and the machine, and everything about it was just absolutely amazing. And what happened was, when my parents got back, of course they weren't too thrilled about me having this big monster arcade machine, in our shared alleyway. And I think they kind of let me off with it for a while. And then we had a new neighbour that moved in, and he basically he had to do some work on his home, and I was on holiday or something, and it was in the middle of the winter and it was snowing, and I don't remember the exact story, but I think he had to move the arcade machine somewhere, and I think he moved it out into a garden, and it kind of got covered up, but with the weather and everything, by the time I came back, it was really, really in bad condition. And people that talk to me about it now, like, they say, it's out of order, that you should have got your neighbour to kind of pay for a new machine. But it was kind of at the point when, I kept getting asked when I was going to kind of sell it or get rid of it. And, I kind of figured that I probably couldn't keep it forever anyway. It was more of like a novelty thing. But, I'm just so proud that I actually, had a Street Fighter arcade machine in my house at one point. And I don't even think I have any photos, but I remember it so well in my own mind that's enough. And I have friends that will remember those days as well of playing. But it was brilliant to be able to do it, and I think that it just proves to you how much I love the game, and that's why I've decided to make this podcast about it. I wish that I could fill you in with more background info on the game. I'm actually just doing my own research on that now, but it is an absolutely brilliant game. But more than learning about the history of it, I would say it's more important to enjoy playing the game and experiencing it. And there's probably people out there that haven't played for years, and I would definitely recommend to them to hit the start button, because it is such a great game. And I mean, I'm not that big into games. Like, when I was younger, I don't really play games very often. But, if anybody ever asked me, do you want to play a game of Street Fighter? It'd be hard for me to say no to them, to be honest. Anyway, thanks very much for listening to this latest Superb Diamond Range podcast. Anybody who would like to get in touch with me, they can email me at superbdiamondrange@gmail.com. The Twitter is at superbdiamondra, and the full archive of my podcasts are at superbdiamondrange.com. Once again, thank you all for listening, and Hadouken!